want to start out with here, before we get into Raw and all that other stuff, is the WWE Network. There was a lot of good stuff on the WWE Network this week, but none better than The Ultimate Legend, which is the Ultimate Warrior 60-minute-long documentary that WWE put together, aired originally on Thursday night, right before NXT. It's up on demand right now. You can check it out anytime you want to if you have a network subscription. I cannot say enough good things about this documentary. It was, I said this on Twitter, and I'll say it again here. And I went back and watched it a second time. If it isn't the best thing that WWE, the best 60-minute long, be it a documentary or even just their regular programming, whatever it may be, the best 60 minutes I've ever seen produced by WWE, and if it isn't the best, it's top 3 of anything they've ever produced before. And that's pretty high praise, and I don't say that lightly. I didn't go into it expecting it to be as good as it was, but when it was over and I came out of it, I just couldn't believe that they had been able to turn around something so awesome so quickly. And it's easily the best thing that the network has ever produced. I know they did the Daniel Bryan Journey to WrestleMania documentary. I like that one to a point. With the Daniel Bryan thing, which was really just following him around leading up to WrestleMania, they interviewed him, Brie Bella, Cesaro, Seth Rollins, a whole bunch of people. They had some Ring of Honor footage, which was really cool. But about halfway through the Daniel Bryan documentary, it got too steeped in kayfabe. It was like, okay, we have John Cena on his tour bus talking about how, Daniel Bryan is facing the toughest challenge of his life. He's in there with the Game, Triple H, and it's like, all right, you got to figure out what you want to be. Do you want this to be a straightforward, behind-the-scenes look at this guy's career and what he's getting ready for, or do you want this to be an in-character documentary? So there was a little bit of an identity crisis there, and I just really, it was hard to stomach some of that stuff. So the Daniel Bryan special was good. It's worth watching, but it can't touch the Warrior documentary. I mean, it's not even close. This is the best thing they've ever produced on that network, and it takes you on an emotional roller coaster. I mean, whether you like the Warrior or not is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. If you thought the guy was a bad wrestler and a bad person, or if you were a big Warrior mark from your childhood to adulthood, it really doesn't matter. The quality of this is such that if you don't have a network subscription and you live in this country and you can pay the $9.99 and subscribe, I would tell you to do it just for this. I don't know if that free trial is still going on. They had a 1-week free trial. If it is, it's a no-brainer. Sign up for the network, take advantage of the free trial, and if you don't do anything else, watch this documentary. And it's so good, it wouldn't shock me at some point if they put this on television. Because, the buzz around this has been that awesome that it's almost a shame the audience for it is so limited. I feel like, it should have a much wider audience, so I hope they do get it on TV at some point. But I just want to run through some of the key stuff that was in the documentary for those who haven't seen it and what really made it such a strong piece. I mean, they go back to the early days of Warrior's career. They've got early Blade Runners footage in here of him and Sting that I didn't even know they had the rights to. And some of the footage of them working out and wearing the mascara and all that kind of stuff is stuff that I had never seen before. And they have some footage of matches from Mid-South and that sort of thing, which makes sense, I guess. They did spend some time in Mid-South, and now they have the Mid-South Library, so maybe that's where it all came from. But they show the Blade Runner stuff along with fresh comments from Steve Borden, better known as Sting. And Sting made his debut on the WWE Network earlier in the week. He had taped something with his cell phone. Literally, it was like 10 seconds long. They had different wrestlers sharing anecdotes about the Warrior. And so Sting was somewhere. He recorded something on his phone, sent it into WWE, and it became a big story. Oh, well, Sting must be in with WWE. He must be signed, sealed, and delivered. And then there were reports that, well, he has a contract in hand, but it hasn't been signed and sent back to them yet, so nobody really knew what was going on. Well, this was fresh footage of Sting. It looked like he was in a hotel room, but this was WWE's camera crew filming comments from Sting. So I have no doubt in my mind that he's in. He's under contract. He's with WWE, and it's just a matter of time now until we see him pop up on television. So Sting's in. And it was cool that the timing, everything worked out perfectly because you never know. Things happen for a reason. Sting was with TNA for so many years, And only now has he finally come over to WWE. Well, here's this guy, Warrior, who he didn't really have much of a relationship with over the last, 20 years. But early on, these guys broke into the business together, and it was very appropriate to be able to get Sting to comment on this. So there were a lot of fresh comments from him. They covered the stuff when he came to WWE, building up to that WrestleMania 6 match with Hulk Hogan. Bobby Heenan pulled Warrior aside at an event one day and told him, hey, your merchandise is outselling Hogan's, which was probably, unheard of for that time. And that led to the WrestleMania 6 match. They went into detail about the professional rivalry between Hogan and Warrior. Warrior talked about it. Vince McMahon openly talked about how when you're a top guy, you're in a competition for your spot. And, whether it's professional jealousy or just, a rivalry between top guys. And we've heard stories from other people who have done interviews that have said, they think that Vince McMahon, at least in the past, probably not today, but, think back to Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels in the mid-'90s, that Vince was as responsible as anybody for kind of stoking the professional fires between guys and wanting them to almost feud with each other because it kind of lit a fire under their ass. They would want to compete that much more for their spot. And here's Vince McMahon on a WWE documentary basically admitting it and basically talking about, listen, this is what happens. And these guys are competing for a spot, and there's going to be, backstabbing and political shenanigans that go on. So that was kind of interesting, hearing Vince talk about that. Warrior said Hogan had a motto. He used to say, keep your enemies closer. I'm sure Hogan was intimidated by Warrior being on the rise, and here's this guy who is getting, cheers like he is and selling more merchandise than he is, and now they want to put the title on him. And yeah, I don't want to say Hogan wanted to go out of his way to sabotage the Warrior, because I don't think he did. But Hogan, even on this documentary, admits, he says, I don't think the Warrior was ready at WrestleMania 6. And Warrior said he was still young. He was only 30, which just blows my mind when I go back and I watch that when Ultimate Warrior won the title from Hogan, he was only 30 years old. It's like, my God. Warrior and Sergeant Slaughter. This was something I even was not aware of. They had backstage footage from the Hall of Fame of Sarge coming into Warrior's dressing room to kind of say hello and reunite with the guy. And it was funny because he said, I have a gift for you. And the gift was a potato, which Warrior laughed uproariously about. And I just chalked it up to mean, when they worked together, Warrior probably was still very green and maybe somewhat stiff, and he probably potatoed a lot of guys, including Sergeant Slaughter. And that just means, he catches you with a real punch, gives you a black eye, that kind of stuff. I remember when Rob Van Dam came into WWE, reading, reports online that a lot of wrestlers, like top guys, were complaining that they were getting potatoed every night by RVD. They were getting caught by a kick in the face and getting their mouth busted open, or a mouse under their eye, that kind of stuff. Slaughter went into a little more detail about the significance of the potato. They did a Legends Roundtable on Friday night, which is also up on demand if you want to go back and watch it. Not really worth going out of your way to see like this. If you have an hour to kill, I guess you can go watch it. It was Josh Matthews narrating a panel with Booker T, Sergeant Slaughter, and of all people, Ted DiBiase, who has made no bones about the fact that he hated the Ultimate Warrior, which is interesting that they would ask him to come on the show. But Sarge went into some more detail about the story in that they had worked a cage match back in '91 against one another, and that might have been the last match they ever worked, and I think they both knew it going in. It was probably on a house show somewhere, and Slaughter had a potato on him. Now, where he would keep this potato, I have no idea, but he claims he had the potato. There was a certain point in the match where Warrior nailed him, and Sarge took it out and kind of sent it flying in the air. And now the potato is in the ring, it's in the cage, it's rolling around, and Warrior picks it up and says, what the hell is this? Who put a potato in the ring? And he realizes, we're in a steel cage here. It's not like the fans are going to be able to chuck it in. So he pretty much figured, okay, it was Slaughter. And anyway, backstage after the match, they had a nice laugh about it. And so here's the footage on this documentary, which when I watched it the first time, I didn't know the significance of it. But now I look back and I see Warrior here on this special laughing about it. And that was really, really cool. I mean, that's one of the really cool kind of personal moments that you get on this documentary. A lot of times you watch WWE stuff and you don't know what's real and what's not. And I'll use Hulk Hogan as an example, because Hogan was all over this documentary. And there's a point later on where Triple H says, he went to Hogan. He calls him Terry. Says he went to Terry and said, he pleaded with him. He said, please, whatever you do, don't approach the Warrior until the Hall of Fame is over. The Warrior, he seemed really happy, really at peace. He was enjoying the event, enjoying the weekend. He didn't want to do anything that was going to set him off, because he knew about the past with Hogan and Warrior. So he requested of Hogan, please leave him alone and don't approach him until after the Hall of Fame is over. And it was at the Superdome, backstage of WrestleMania. Hogan said he was in a golf cart being driven around backstage, and he spotted the Warrior, had the golf cart stop, and he walked over and approached him. And they got the whole thing on camera. So right away you think to yourself, okay, how genuine is this? It's being filmed. But, they did have cameras following these guys around all weekend. And with Hogan, you never know. Hogan is, I guess, in a different place in his life now. He's all about positivity and mending fences and that sort of stuff. So Hogan, he's face-to-face here with the Warrior, and we're watching this. And Hogan just apologizes. He says, listen, I'm sorry for everything. It was all my fault. Please accept my apology. I'm hoping that we could even be friends. And to his credit, Warrior's a straight shooter. He's standing there and, he's saying to Hogan, listen, you did a lot of really nasty stuff in the past, and I want to be able to trust you. I want to be able to accept your apology. You can see he's kind of iffy about it, but then he finally does, and they shake hands. And it was a nice moment, to see them, however genuine it was, to see them make up, backstage. But I got to say this, whatever Hogan did, whatever Hogan may have said, and you hear stories about Hogan, the master politician, and all that kind of stuff, I do feel like, if I'm Hogan, I get why he's doing that, but does Hogan really need to be the one apologizing profusely to the Warrior? What did Hogan really ever do or say about the Warrior that was that bad compared to some of the shit that Warrior said about him in recent years? That whole YouTube video that's still up, it's like an hour long. And it was from like 2-3 years ago, and it's Warrior sitting in his basement talking about Hogan, all the drugs that he did, as though Warrior's a perfect angel. About Hogan offering his wife to Warrior for sex, which has never been corroborated. I have my doubts about that. I mean, that just sounds way out there to me. But, I mean, Warrior said a lot of really nasty shit about Hogan, so I feel like it should be going both ways here. It was only going one way in this special. Hogan was practically on his knees, begging for forgiveness from the Warrior, but the Warrior should have probably apologized to him first for some of the shit that he said. But nonetheless, they made up, and that was cool. We had, they covered the retirement match between Warrior and Savage from 1991. Then the SummerSlam stuff, which was litigated many years later. That was when they fired Warrior for allegedly holding up Vince for $500,000 before the show. Vince promised to give him the money, only so that he would go out and do the match. And then as soon as Warrior came back through the curtain, Vince pulled him aside in a meeting and fired him. And so that was interesting to hear them talk about that. We got some rare footage of Warrior at a post-WrestleMania 8 press conference that, unless they showed it on Superstars or Wrestling Challenge, I don't remember ever seeing this. It was Warrior. He was in his face paint. It may have been right after Mania ended. And he's talking like a normal person, answering questions, and says, in no uncertain terms, I came back to win the title. That's what he said. He said, I came back to become the champion, and in due time, it will happen. And, of course, didn't exactly work out that way. But that's where things got really interesting in this documentary, because for the first time I can ever recall on anything produced by WWE, we had Vince McMahon talking openly about steroids and human growth hormone, which is awesome, because you can't do an Ultimate Warrior documentary without talking about steroids. You just can't. The two go together. Same thing with Hogan, but especially with Warrior, because Warrior had a physique far and above Hogan's. So I thought that was actually really refreshing to see. Now, did they tell the whole truth? Did they go into all the little specific details? Of course not. I didn't expect them to. But I didn't expect the word steroids to be mentioned on here either. And Vince is on there saying Warrior and Davey Boy Smith were found to be experimenting with HGH. And he stressed, it wasn't illegal at the time, but it wasn't right. And Vince claimed this was many years ago, so nobody really knew too much about it, which is total BS. Vince was the brainchild of the World Bodybuilding Federation. He and Warrior both were huge bodybuilding buffs. I don't buy for a second that he was ignorant about what HGH was. But still, it was refreshing to hear them being somewhat honest about this stuff on their own programming. It was actually pretty incredible to be sitting here watching this. And Warrior even said here the government was cracking down on WWE, and so WWE all of a sudden became a lot more strict about things when it came to drug testing and stuff like that, and cracking down. And, that was when they suspended Warrior and Davey Boy. Actually, I think he got fired because Bulldog ended up in WCW a few months later, which tells you how strict WCW was at the time when it came to their own steroid policy. Covered Warrior's debut in WCW as Halloween Havoc debacle with Hogan, which Hogan admits here was all his fault. He took the blame for it being so bad. They even showed him trying to set that flash paper on fire to throw a fireball at Warrior. That's when it wouldn't light. And then finally it did light, but Hogan ended up singeing his own eyebrow. I think all the hair on Hogan's face got singed off from that fireball. The whole thing was just a complete disaster. There's a mixture of footage on here from his new DVD that just came out at the beginning of the month, and new comments, plus all the footage of him from WrestleMania week. But the DVD stuff was very limited. So I've had people ask me, well, is it just a rehash of the new DVD that came out? There is some footage of him sitting, I guess, in front of a fireplace in his home. That was from the DVD, but it's very, very limited. It's mostly all new, never-before-seen stuff. So if you're worried that it's just a rehash of the DVD, it's not. It's really not. It's mostly made up of good stuff. Yeah, the documentary was the story that Warrior always wanted to be told, and obviously with his dying, they rushed it out because the original plan here was for this to be a DVD. This was going to be a DVD documentary many months down the road with all the WrestleMania week stuff and the Hall of Fame stuff, and plans changed when he died. So they rushed this thing out, and when you consider how quickly they had to turn this around, it's unbelievable how awesome this thing turned out to be. Because this doesn't come off as a rush job at all. I mean, they go in-depth on stuff that I wouldn't even expect them to. And they didn't have to. We have footage of Warrior at Stamford a few weeks before WrestleMania, meeting all the executives. They were going over plans for his brand, I guess, moving forward. He reunites with Triple H in Triple H's office, and pretty cool moment, actually. Triple H is like a big screen in his office that is a direct video link to the Performance Center down in Orlando. So at any moment when somebody's training in the ring or doing something, cutting a promo, there's a direct video link to Triple H's office, and he can just watch it. So he's showing Warrior all this stuff. Warrior was in another executive's office being shown all the different Warrior designs and the different logos they were planning to market. And in the background, if you paid attention, there was a Royal Rumble pay-per-view poster. It was either from this year or last year, with a yellow Post-it note placed over CM Punk's face. I thought that was hilarious. And petty, but mostly hilarious. So then it really gets into the emotional stuff. Warrior backstage at rehearsals for the Hall of Fame, hugging Vince McMahon, kind of reuniting with him on good terms, and making up with each other. They kiss and make up here. And Warrior backstage with Linda McMahon, who he personally selected to induct him, and Warrior's telling stories about how he used to be over at the McMahon's house in Connecticut, and he was very close with Shane. Him and Shane would wrestle around. Shane would attack him, and he would kind of swat him away. It's a shame they couldn't get Shane in to offer some comments, because you got the impression watching this that him and Shane at one time, before things went to hell, were actually pretty close. They show Warrior backstage with his two little girls. And to me, maybe the most emotional part of the whole DVD, besides the ending, obviously, is Vince mentioned that he had always thought of the Warrior as the little engine that could, because he never took no for an answer. All the battles they had and everything, never took no for an answer. So they must have had a conversation many, many years ago where Vince told him that. He said, listen, you're like the little engine that could. And I don't think it was ever spoken of ever again. But we have a scene here where Warrior is backstage at the Hall of Fame, and he's got a copy of The Little Engine That Could. and he signs it with a personal message that he reads out loud to Vince, and then he signs it, always believe Warrior. So Vince is in, I guess it would be the gorilla position, as Warrior's about to go out for his speech, and Warrior hands him the book, and Vince has this puzzled look on his face, and he looks down and he realizes what it is, and he just starts laughing, and it's like he can't believe it. And Warrior says, you told me something many years ago, and I just wanted you to remember, or wanted you to know that I remembered that. So then they cut back to Vince in studio making comments, and Vince says, it shows that he was actually listening all along. And that's when Vince loses it, and it's very rare that you see Vince McMahon cry or Vince McMahon well up. I mean, it's happened before, but not very often, but this was as close as I've ever seen to Vince McMahon in tears. And I'm not talking about that segment on Raw a couple years ago where, remember he was wearing the pink suit jacket? He was in the ring with Triple H, and Triple H said, you're out of power, and Vince started crying in the ring. That was all for show, but this was legit, and this was tough to watch. And Vince's eyes are all red and welled up with tears, and he says, you don't know what you have until you don't have it. So clearly, with all the past stuff between them, it's just water under the bridge, and then this happens, and it's you look back and it's almost, the timing is just so eerie that after 18 years of all the squabbling and the legal battles and the nastiness and the self-destruction DVD and everything else, they finally put all that stuff to bed, and then the guy dies. And you could see it had a real impact on Vince McMahon. The last photo with Vince and Warrior is showed, and Stephanie had tweeted it out actually that night on Raw when Warrior came out. And they say on the special here that Warrior requested it. He said, listen, he asked if somebody could take a photo of him and Vince before he left. And Vince says that may have been the last photo Warrior ever took. I don't think it was. There were fans who had tweeted photos with Warrior the day he died at the airport. But that was the last photo of Vince and Warrior together. And again, very, very emotional. Triple H talks about how he got a text from his assistant who was contacted by Dana, Warrior's wife, telling her that he had died, and Triple H was just, blown away by it. And then he realized that he had to tell Vince. So then Triple H got very emotional, and, at the end of the DVD, Sting says something that I said last week, which is, you look at the sequence and the timeline of events here and how everything went down that last weekend, and it was almost prophetic. Sting says it was almost prophetic, like it was meant to be. It was meant to happen this way. And that pretty much is the crux of the DVD. I mean, there's a lot of other really cool footage in there. I even left out some stuff. But well worth going out of your way to see. I can't rave about this enough. It's one of the best things that WWE has ever produced. I don't care if you're an Ultimate Warrior fan or not. You will enjoy this DVD. I mean, this was just awesome, awesome stuff. And I hope it does end up on USA Network or television, wherever at some point, because it's that good. And there's a lot of international fans who can't get the network, or people who just won't buy it for whatever reason. I don't know why I don't know why they wouldn't at least sample it, especially for stuff like this. But hopefully it gets wider distribution at some point, because people need to see this. And I want to see them do more stuff like this. If this is a sign of stuff that we can expect on the network going forward, then I'm all in. The Daniel Bryan stuff was okay. Like I said, it got a little too in character, a little too cute, I think. This just blew that out of the water. I mean, this was just awesome stuff. And it takes you on an emotional ride, that's for sure. I mean, there's a lot of moments that make you laugh and make you smile, but then you also, those damn ninjas chopping onions, they get to you at the end. And I didn't even mention the stuff about the Hogan deposition. When they go into the self-destruction DVD and Warrior had filed litigation, and Hogan made some comments on the DVD going back to the SummerSlam stuff when Warrior got fired about finding out, supposedly, that Warrior was holding up Vince for more money and making a comment about how in the old days, we would have broken the guy's legs. And they called Hogan in for a deposition. They actually had video footage from Hogan's deposition. I mean, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe I was actually watching something that was produced by WWE. So, 2 thumbs up. I cannot recommend enough. It is absolutely worth going out of your way to see.